On Business News, we're going to be discussing the impact of the Russia invasion of Ukraine. Well, as the COVID-19 pandemic demonstrated, events on one side of the planet can send shockwaves to the other side of the planet. The ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine has left global oil and gas markets in the uncertain and unstable, causing supply issues and price spikes. Well, since Ukraine and Russia are at war, what's the effect on the global energy market? To discuss this is a global affairs analyst. Colin Sunweke is joining us from Brussels via Zoom. It's good to have you join us this morning on the program. Before the shelling and bombardment of Ukraine, we had seen staggering global oil prices, Brent crude going as high as $100 per barrel. More than a week now, we see $110 per barrel. Do you see this coming?
Well, I think to a large extent it was to be expected. And, depending on who is looking and analyzing, who is looking at the news and analyzing it, I think the situation is even more bleak because, you've talked about 110. There is a certain projection that it's going to rise as high as up to 150. And we are talking of Brent crude. So you see, it's quite an uncertain time, coming. For some economies, I think this is good news. For some others, it's going to be, a devastating news. And then for yet others, there might have to be some sort of balance. Take Nigeria, for example, that is an oil-producing country. Yes, there is going to be more yield. However, there are going to be other impacts on the social and economic life of the country that might then actually balance off the gains from the boom. And so it's a wait and see approach that the world has got to adopt in this instance.
Well, pretty uncertain times. But looking at the retaliatory sanctions from the West, some persons would say that it's good news for a petrodollar economy like Nigeria. Do you see, how does this further tilt the balance of fuel subsidy management strategy?
Well, the way it tilts it is as follows. I mean, the most devastating sanction, at least from the Russian perspective, is locking them out of the SWIFT payment corridor. Okay, now that in itself is not where it's going to end. I mean, there are other areas associated with it that will have some impacts on economies like Nigeria. But the thing is, with and let's be clear about one thing. I think this is important. The sanctions that Europe and their Western alliance have, meted out on Russia does not include oil. So it is expected that the flow of oil, natural gas, and oil from Russia to the rest of the world, which is about 40% to Europe at least, continues. Okay, so as far as the demand and supply side is concerned, there is not going to be an impact, at least up until now. If Russia decides to retaliate, but the prospect is low. Let's take, let's for the argument that Russia decides to retaliate. Well, yes, countries like Nigeria, with production capacity and all of that, would have to gain from such.
That would be very interesting because a lot of persons are saying that some European countries might be looking up to Nigeria, of course, to supply gas if we actually get that right. But do you see us preparing? Are we prepared in any slightest way to have the disruption to see European countries, of course, come to Africa, Nigeria to be specific, to get gas and other oil products?
Well, honestly speaking, I think it's difficult to make an assessment about the level of preparedness of Nigeria to supply the global market. But at least if we have to rely on what has been ongoing before now, where Nigeria supplies the rest of the world. I know, for example, that Nigeria supplies oil to Belgium, where I am right now. So if they could do that, I think the initial capacity is there, and I believe that with collaboration, from the demand side, I believe that what is left would have to be beefed up, and then the capacity for Nigeria to supply the global market will be there. And don't forget, even before now, Nigeria supplies also to the United States, although that has rescinded in the past because the US are actually producing more than they need and are actually exporting to other parts of the world.
Before I let you go, just 2 days back or 3 days back now, IEA member countries had agreed to release 60 million barrels of oil from their emergency reserves to send, a unified and strong message to the global oil markets so that there will be no shortfall in supply. But can European countries reduce their reliance on Russian gas supplies by, say, next year? Is there a possibility?
The possibility in the long run is there. Long term. But in the immediate, I just don't see how that is going to happen. The uncertainty in the energy market occasioned by the invasion of Russia of Ukraine, of course, has already sent very strong shock waves to the point, of course, that prices are high even before this invasion took place. So the dependence on Russian oil is something that Europe has got to be, to contend with. And let's be clear about one thing: Europe wasn't open enough. They weren't transparent enough in actually informing their citizens about the impact of the sanctions. Now, let's put a figure to it. Europe depends for 40% of the natural gas supply from Russia. And as far as oil is concerned, a little above 25%. That is huge. But there are other plans to turn to Saudi Arabia, and if the US-Iran nuclear deal is going to be renegotiated and agreement seen, that will of course beef up production from Iran, and US producing as well will mean that they have multiple sources to make up for the shortfall that an eventual cut-off from Russian supply will occasion.
Of course, the uncertain duration of this conflict, though, makes it difficult to predict how much of the disruption will be permanent and how much is just temporary. Collins Nweke, Global Affairs Analyst, thank you so much for joining us on TVC Breakfast.
Thank you for having me.